Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. It smelled like freshly cut grass, sharp and clean, yet misplaced amidst the sterile scent of the office. I stood by the desk, my fingers grazing the edge, suddenly aware of the subtle prickle along my spine. The aroma seemed to weave through the air vents, whispering of open fields and distant afternoons. I glanced around the room, but everything appeared as it should, papers neatly stacked, the clock ticking in its rhythmic indifference. But the scent lingered, more vivid than before, pulling at the frayed edges of a memory I couldn't quite grasp. It was the same scent that had filled the car that day when the world had spun sideways, a sensation that shouldn't have returned, but here it was. I've been sitting here for hours now, staring at this blank page, this microphone. My hands shake every time I reach for it. 5 years. 5 years I've kept this buried, told myself it was nothing, that I imagined it all. But the smell came back, and with it, everything else. The doctor said trauma does that fragments surface when you least expect them. But this isn't trauma, this is something else entirely. I need to tell someone, I need to get this out before it consumes what's left of me. My therapist says confession is healing, that speaking truth into the world diminishes its power over us. She's wrong about this one. Some truths grow stronger when spoken, but I can't carry it alone anymore. Before everything changed, my life was beautifully ordinary. I worked the night shift at the monitoring station, watching screens that tracked weather patterns across the region. It was peaceful work, just me, the hum of equipment, and the gentle glow of radar displays painting their endless circles. The building sat on a hill overlooking farmland, isolated enough that I could go hours without seeing another soul. I preferred it that way. The solitude felt like a sanctuary. The facility was modern but unremarkable: concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of computers that never slept. My job was simple: observe, record, report anomalies. Weather moved in predictable patterns, and I'd learned to read them like familiar stories. Storms announced themselves hours in advance. Rain came with its own signature. Everything had its place in the natural order. I'd been working there for 3 months when things started to feel different. Not wrong, exactly, just different. It began with the coffee maker. Every morning I'd arrive to find it already brewing, though I was certain I'd unplugged it before leaving. The security guard insisted he never touched it. Maybe the timer was broken, I thought. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Then the air conditioning started cycling at odd intervals. The building would grow warm, then suddenly cold, then warm again. The temperature gauge showed steady readings, but my body told a different story. I'd find myself shivering in my jacket one moment, sweating the next. The maintenance crew checked the system twice, found nothing wrong. The screens began acting up around the same time. Subtle things at first, pixels that flickered in the corner of my vision, gone when I looked directly. Lines of static that appeared for a fraction of a second during routine scans. I ran diagnostics every night. Everything came back normal, clean signals, perfect reception, but I knew what I was seeing. Sleep became elusive, not because of the work schedule. I'd always been a natural night owl. Something else was keeping me awake during the day, a persistent feeling that I was forgetting something important, like walking into a room and losing track of why you came. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, while fragments of dreams I couldn't quite remember played at the edges of my consciousness. The first time I heard the tone, I thought it was equipment feedback, a low, steady hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It would start around midnight, barely audible beneath the normal sounds of the facility. But as the nights passed, it grew clearer, more distinct. Not quite mechanical, not quite organic, something in between. I mentioned it to my supervisor during our weekly check-in. He listened politely, made a note in his file. The next day, 2 technicians spent hours testing every piece of equipment in the building. They found nothing that could produce such a sound. One of them suggested it might be wind through the ventilation system. The other thought maybe pipes settling in the walls. Their explanations felt hollow, but I nodded and thanked them anyway. The tone continued, night after night, starting at the same time, lasting exactly 47 minutes. I timed it obsessively, wrote down every variation in pitch and intensity. The pattern never changed. Whatever was creating it operated with mechanical precision, yet the sound itself felt alive, breathing, waiting. My reflection started bothering me, not the way I looked, something deeper than vanity. I'd catch glimpses of myself in the dark windows of the control room, and for just a moment the person staring back wouldn't seem quite right. The angle of my shoulders, the tilt of my head, the expression on my face all slightly off, like looking at a photograph that had been subtly altered. I stopped looking at reflective surfaces after dark. The weather patterns grew strange around the facility. Not dramatically, nothing that would trigger official attention. But I noticed rain clouds that formed too quickly, dissipated too suddenly. Pressure readings that didn't match the visual data. Temperature variations that created their own microclimates within a few square miles. I documented everything meticulously, but my reports generated no interest from headquarters. Natural variations, they said, within acceptable parameters. I started arriving early, staying late, not because the work demanded it, but because leaving felt wrong somehow. The building had become familiar in a way that went beyond comfort. It felt necessary, like I belonged there, or maybe like it belonged to me. The drive home seemed longer each day, the world outside increasingly foreign and harsh. That's when I noticed the car following me. Not every night and never obviously. A sedan with tinted windows that appeared in my rearview mirror during the last few miles of my commute. It maintained perfect distance, never getting close enough for me to read the license plate, never falling far enough back to disappear completely. When I turned into my apartment complex, it would continue straight, as if the timing was coincidental. But coincidences don't repeat themselves with such mathematical precision. I changed my route, took side streets, made random turns, stopped at convenience stores I'd never visited before. The car adapted to every variation, maintaining its invisible tether. Whoever was driving possessed either supernatural patience or professional training. I began to suspect both. Sleep became impossible, not just difficult, genuinely impossible. I'd lie in bed feeling exhausted, but the moment I closed my eyes, my mind would flood with images I couldn't identify. Corridors that stretched infinitely in both directions. Rooms filled with equipment I didn't recognize. Faces that seemed familiar but belonged to no one I'd ever met. I'd snap awake gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat that smelled like ozone and copper. The night everything changed started like any other. I arrived at the facility just before sunset, nodded to the security guard, settled into my usual chair in front of the monitoring array. The weather looked calm. A high-pressure system had settled over the region, promising clear skies and gentle winds. Easy shift ahead. The tone started earlier than usual, not midnight but barely past 10. And it was different, higher in pitch, more urgent. I felt it in my chest before I heard it with my ears, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the building's foundation. The screens flickered in rhythm with the sound, displaying patterns I'd never seen before. Not weather data, something else entirely. I should have called my supervisor, should have followed protocol and reported the anomaly immediately. Instead, I sat transfixed, watching geometric shapes flow across the displays like living mathematics. They pulsed with their own internal light, creating shadows that moved independently of their sources. Beautiful and terrible and utterly wrong. The air grew thick, almost viscous. Each breath required conscious effort, as if the atmosphere itself was changing composition. The familiar scent of electronic equipment was overwhelmed by something organic and sweet like flowers left too long in stagnant water. My skin began to tingle, tiny pinpricks of sensation that spread from my fingertips up my arms. That's when I saw myself on the security monitor. Not live footage. I was sitting in the control room, but the figure on screen stood in the parking lot, perfectly still, face turned up toward the building. Same clothes, same posture, same everything, except the expression. The person on the monitor wore a smile I'd never seen in any mirror, serene and knowing and completely alien. I ran to the window. The parking lot was empty except for my car and the guard's pickup truck. But on the monitor, my doppelganger continued its patient vigil, that impossible smile never wavering. I cycled through the other security feeds, there by the equipment shed. Another version of myself, this one walking in slow circles, arms hanging limp at its sides, and another by the main entrance, pressing its palms against the glass doors. The tone reached a crescendo that made my teeth ache. Every screen in the facility blazed with white light, then went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. In that crimson glow, I saw them more clearly, dozens of figures that wore my face, arranged in perfect formation around the building. All smiling, all waiting. I don't remember leaving the control room. One moment I was frozen at the window, the next I was stumbling through the emergency exit, my legs moving without conscious direction. The night air hit me like a physical blow, cold and sharp and blessedly real. Behind me, the facility hummed with energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. My car started on the first try, though I don't recall getting in or turning the key. The headlights swept across empty pavement as I reversed, but I could feel them watching from the shadows between buildings. In the rearview mirror, the facility blazed with light that shouldn't have been possible, every window brilliant white, casting geometric shadows that hurt to look at directly. I drove without destination, taking turns at random, following roads that led away from everything familiar. The radio played nothing but static. My phone showed no signal. The fuel gauge read full no matter how many miles I traveled. Time seemed elastic, stretching and compressing around me like something alive. When dawn finally came, I found myself parked beside a highway I didn't recognize, in a state I couldn't identify. The car reeked of that sweet, metallic smell, the same scent that now fills this office as I speak. My clothes were different, not entirely still my shirt, my pants, my shoes, but somehow altered in ways I couldn't articulate. They fit differently, felt foreign against my skin. I never went back to work, never called in sick or submitted a resignation. Simply disappeared from that life as if it had never existed. When I finally worked up the courage to drive past the facility months later, the building was gone. Not demolished, gone. Empty lot, overgrown with grass that grew in perfect geometric patterns. No foundation, no debris, no evidence that anything had ever stood there. The nightmares started immediately and never stopped. Not dreams, exactly too vivid, too consistent. Every night I returned to that control room, watched those impossible patterns flow across the screens. But now I understand what I'm seeing. They're not random displays of light and shadow. They're maps, instructions, blueprints for something that hasn't happened yet but will. My reflection never came back right. In mirrors, photographs, windows, the person looking back wears expressions I don't remember making. Sometimes I catch it smiling when I'm not, Sometimes its eyes track movement I can't see. I've stopped looking when I can avoid it, but reflections are everywhere and they're all wrong now. The scent follows me, not constantly, but at moments when I'm starting to feel safe, starting to believe I've moved far enough away. It seeps through air vents in hotel rooms, rises from coffee cups in restaurants, clings to clothes I've never worn. A reminder that distance is an illusion, that some things can't be escaped through simple geography. I've tried talking to professionals. Therapists nod sympathetically and prescribe medications that don't touch what's really wrong. Sleep specialists monitor my brain waves and find nothing abnormal. Neurologists run their tests and declare me perfectly healthy. None of them smell what I smell. None of them see what I see in the corners of their offices when the light hits just right. The car still follows me sometimes. Different car now, different driver probably, but the same patient distance, the same mechanical precision. I've stopped trying to lose it. What's the point? They're not trying to catch me. They're just making sure I know they're there, making sure I remember that I belong to something larger than myself now. I moved across the country, changed my name, my appearance, my entire life. Found work that keeps me around people during daylight hours, convinced myself that normalcy was possible, that I could build something new from the fragments of who I used to be. But you can't run from something that lives inside you. You can't hide from something that knows exactly where you are at every moment. The tone comes back sometimes, usually when I'm alone, usually at night, not as loud as before, but unmistakable. It starts as a whisper at the edge of hearing, then grows until it fills my skull with its patient, mechanical rhythm. 47 minutes exactly, never more, never less. When it stops, I find things in my apartment that weren't there before. Small things, a pen on a table I don't own, flowers in a vase I've never seen. Photographs of places I've never been, with people who look almost but not quite like me. I know they're still watching, still waiting. The facility may be gone, but whatever operated it remains. I was chosen for something that night, marked in ways I'm only beginning to understand. The worst part isn't the fear, it's the growing certainty that part of me wants to go back. That part of me belongs there in that space between what is and what shouldn't be. Sometimes I catch myself researching weather monitoring stations, looking at job postings for night shift positions in isolated facilities. My finger hovers over the apply button while that sweet metallic scent fills the room and my reflection smiles from the computer screen. I haven't clicked yet, but the urge grows stronger every day. The truth is, I'm not telling this story to find peace or closure. I'm telling it because I can feel myself slipping back towards something I should run from. Because the person I was before that night is fading, being replaced by something that understands those geometric patterns, that can read the maps hidden in static and shadow. I'm telling this story because I need someone to know what happened when I finally stop fighting it. When I finally go home to the place that's been calling me back all these years. The place that smells like freshly cut grass and tastes like copper pennies and sounds like mathematics given voice. I can hear it now as I speak these words, the tone rising from somewhere deep beneath the floor. 47 minutes of patient instruction, teaching me things I already know but haven't remembered yet. My reflection in the window is smiling again, and this time I think I'm smiling back. They're not following me anymore, they don't need to. I'm coming home on my own, story 2. The clock hands trembled, frozen between seconds. Each chime seemed to echo an unfamiliar hour, slipping through grasp like sand. Books leaned awkwardly on the shelf, forming shadows that slithered over the carpet in patterns I'd never seen. In the mirror, my reflection blinked too soon, eyes mirrored not quite mine. The room inhaled my uncertainty, exhaling a draft that curled pages of a closed book. The quiet hum of the refrigerator faltered, skipping a beat. I reached to steady a picture frame, only to find the image smiling differently, a sensation unfurling in the pit of my stomach in answer to a question unasked. The first dream came on a Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday. Those distinctions blur when sleep becomes unreliable. I found myself lying in my bed, but the ceiling seemed higher than usual, stretching into a soft darkness that breathed with me. There was a light somewhere above, pale and oval-shaped, pulsing like a heartbeat made visible. It wasn't bright enough to hurt my eyes, just persistent enough to notice. A sound accompanied it, a gentle hum, the kind you might hear from old fluorescent bulbs, but smoother, more intentional. Like someone was adjusting a radio frequency, searching for the right station. I tried to move, to turn my head toward the source, but my body felt heavy, comfortable in that dreamlike way where effort seems unnecessary. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window. The ceiling looked normal again, painted white with that small water stain in the corner I'd been meaning to fix. I dismissed the dream as stress. Work had been demanding lately, and my sleep schedule was irregular, nothing more than my mind processing the day's tensions. But the dream returned. The second time I was in the same position, lying on my back, but the experience lasted longer. The oval light was still there, pulsing with that same rhythmic intensity, but now it seemed to move slightly, drifting from left to right in slow, deliberate arcs. The humming sound was closer, more complex. Underneath the main frequency, I could detect something else. A voice, perhaps, but so distorted and distant that I couldn't make out words. My body felt different this time, not heavy but light, as if I were floating just above the mattress. The sensation was pleasant, almost therapeutic, like being suspended in warm water. The air around me carried a strange scent, sharp and clean, like the smell after a thunderstorm, but more artificial, more precise. The voice in the background grew slightly clearer, though still incomprehensible. It wasn't speaking any language I recognized, or maybe it was speaking in frequencies rather than words. The sound seemed to come from the same direction as the light, somewhere above and ahead of me. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my voice wouldn't work, not because I couldn't make sound, but because it didn't seem necessary. Whatever was occurring felt natural, expected, like a routine I'd forgotten but my body remembered. When I woke from this second dream, I noticed something odd. My bedroom door was open. I always sleep with it closed, a habit from childhood that I've never broken. Standing in the doorway, looking down the hallway, I felt a strange familiarity, as if I'd walked this path recently, but I couldn't remember leaving my bed during the night. The days between dreams began to feel hollow, like intermissions in a play I didn't remember auditioning for. I found myself distracted at work, staring out windows, listening for sounds that weren't there. Colleagues asked if I was feeling well. I assured them I was fine, just tired. But small things started appearing that didn't belong. A coffee mug in my kitchen that I didn't recognize, plain white ceramic with no markings. It was clean, sitting in my cabinet as if it had always been there. When I asked my neighbor if she'd been in my apartment, she looked at me strangely and said no. My phone started acting up around the same time. The screen would flicker occasionally, displaying static patterns that lasted only seconds. The interference seemed random, but it reminded me of something. The frequency from my dreams, perhaps, translated into visual noise. I began to notice a small mark on my left wrist, just below my palm. It wasn't quite a bruise, more like a pressure mark, perfectly round and about the size of a coin. I couldn't remember injuring myself, and it didn't hurt when I touched it, but it was there, real and visible, fading slowly over several days. The third dream was different, more vivid than waking life, more substantial than reality itself. I was in the same position, but now I could see details I'd missed before. The room around me wasn't quite my bedroom. The walls were the same color, but they curved slightly, creating a space that felt both familiar and impossible. The oval light was larger now, close enough that I could see its surface wasn't smooth. It had texture like brushed metal, and it rotated slowly as it pulsed. The humming had evolved into something more complex, layered with harmonics that seemed to resonate in my chest. The voice was clearer, though still not quite language. It felt like communication, like someone was trying to tell me something important, but the meaning existed just beyond my understanding. I had the impression of kindness, of patience, as if whoever was speaking was willing to repeat themselves as many times as necessary. This time I could move, not my whole body, but my eyes, my head. I turned to look around and saw instruments I didn't recognize, smooth surfaces that reflected the oval light, creating patterns of illumination that shifted and danced across the curved walls. Time felt different here, elastic. I might have been lying there for minutes or hours. The sensation of floating was stronger, and I realized I could feel something supporting me, something that adjusted to my body's contours perfectly. When I tried to wake up, I couldn't, not immediately. It was as if I had to remember how, like recalling a skill I'd forgotten. When I finally opened my eyes in my actual bedroom, the transition felt violent, jarring. Reality seemed flat and colorless compared to where I'd been. The boundary between sleeping and waking began to dissolve. I would be sitting at my desk, working on reports, when I'd hear the humming. Faint but unmistakable, lasting just long enough for me to look up and listen before fading into the ambient noise of the office. The oval light started appearing in my peripheral vision during the day, never when I looked directly, but there in the corner of my sight, pulsing gently. I'd turn my head quickly, trying to catch it, but it was always gone. My reflection in mirrors began to look unfamiliar, not dramatically different, but wrong in subtle ways. My eyes seemed larger, more alert. My skin had a quality I couldn't identify, as if it had been touched by a different kind of light. I started losing track of conversations. People would be talking to me, and I'd realize I hadn't been listening, not because I was distracted, but because I was hearing something else. The voice from my dreams, still speaking in that almost language, still trying to communicate something just beyond my comprehension. Sleep became unreliable. I'd lie in bed for hours, not quite awake but not dreaming either, existing in a space between states. During these periods, I'd feel the floating sensation, smell that sharp, clean scent, hear the layered humming that seemed to come from inside my own head. My apartment felt different. Rooms seemed larger at night, smaller during the day. The furniture cast shadows that didn't match the light sources. I'd walk from the kitchen to the living room and feel like I was covering more distance than the floor plan allowed. The mark on my wrist returned in exactly the same place. This time I watched it appear over the course of several hours like a photograph developing in slow motion. It didn't hurt, but it felt significant, like a reminder of something I was supposed to remember. I began to suspect that what I'd been calling dreams weren't dreams at all. The memories felt too consistent, too detailed. Real experiences have a certain weight to them, a texture that imagination lacks. These memories had that weight. But if they weren't dreams, what were they? And why couldn't I remember them clearly until I was asleep? I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I could remember as soon as I woke up. The details were always vivid for the first few minutes, then they'd fade like morning mist. but certain elements remained constant. The oval light, the humming, the floating sensation, the patient voice trying to communicate. Reading my own handwriting, I noticed that some of the words looked unfamiliar, as if I'd written them in a hurry or while distracted. But they were in my handwriting, describing experiences that felt more real than the act of writing about them. The fourth dream, if it was a dream, lasted longer than any before. I was in the curved room again, but now I could see beyond it. Through what might have been windows or screens, I glimpsed a landscape that didn't belong to any place I knew. Rolling hills under a sky that was the wrong color, too pale, too uniform. The voice was speaking directly to me now, and while I still couldn't understand the words, I could feel the meaning. Reassurance, explanation, apology perhaps, the impression that this was temporary, that I would understand soon. I could move more freely, though I chose not to. The floating sensation was pleasant, and I felt safe, cared for. The instruments around me hummed with activity, but nothing felt threatening. It was more like being in a very advanced medical facility, surrounded by technology designed to help rather than harm. When I woke or when I returned, I found myself standing in my kitchen. I had no memory of getting out of bed, of walking there. The white ceramic mug was sitting on the counter, filled with water that was still cool, as if it had just been poured. The dreams began to feel more real than reality. My waking life became the intermission, the time between meaningful experiences. I found myself looking forward to sleep, to returning to that curved room with its patient voice and gentle light. But I also began to understand that something was being hidden from me, not maliciously, but protectively. Like a parent shielding a child from information they're not ready to process. The knowledge was there, waiting, but it existed behind a barrier I couldn't quite cross. My phone's interference became more frequent and more complex. Instead of random static, the patterns seemed organized, almost like text or symbols. I tried to photograph them, but the camera couldn't capture what I was seeing. The images came out normal, showing only a functioning screen. People at work started commenting on my appearance. I looked rested, they said, healthier than I had in months, but I felt distant from them, as if we were speaking across a great divide. Their concerns seemed small and temporary compared to what I was experiencing at night. The mark on my wrist became permanent, not painful, not problematic, but always there. A small, perfect circle that reminded me of the oval light, as if the two were connected somehow. I began to remember fragments during the day, not full scenes but sensations, the feeling of being lifted gently, the sound of that almost language being spoken with infinite patience, the impression of being studied but with kindness, with care. The curved room felt more like home than my apartment. When I was there, floating in that gentle light, listening to that patient voice, I felt like I was where I belonged. My waking life began to feel like the dream, a strange interlude in a larger, more important experience. But tonight, as I lie here waiting for sleep, I notice something different. The oval light is already here, pulsing gently above my bed. The humming is starting, building in layers and harmonics. The voice is beginning to speak, still in that almost language that feels like understanding without words. But this time, when I reach up to touch the light, my hand doesn't pass through empty air. This time the light is solid, warm, real. This time when I try to wake up, I realize I already am. The white ceramic mug sits on my nightstand, filled with that sharp, clean scent. The mark on my wrist pulses in rhythm with the oval light, and I understand, finally, that I was never dreaming at all. Story 3. I'm trying to remember. The coffee smell comes back to me sometimes, cutting through everything else like a blade through fog. But it's wrong somehow, too sweet, too thick. The pine scent underneath it feels like drowning. I keep writing these fragments down because the doctors said it might help. Memory reconstruction, they called it. But every time I put pen to paper, the words feel like they belong to someone else. Someone who lived in my skin before everything went dark. The drawer, I remember the drawer. No, that's not right. I remember standing in front of it, my hand reaching out, the metal handle cold against my palm. But then there's this gap, this void where the next moment should be. Like someone took scissors to my thoughts and cut out the important parts. The sunlight was different that morning, not warm like sunlight should be. It moved wrong across the floor, casting shadows that bent in impossible directions. I can see it now, playing behind my eyelids when I closed them. Those patterns weren't gentle, they were hungry. Sometimes I wake up and my mouth tastes like copper, not blood, something else, something that makes my teeth ache and my tongue feel too big for my mouth. The taste connects to a sound, a low humming that seems to come from inside my bones, but when I try to focus on it, it slips away like water through my fingers. The room was holding its breath. I wrote that down before, didn't I? But rooms don't breathe. Rooms don't have lungs or heartbeats or the ability to watch you with invisible eyes, yet I know it was watching. I could feel its attention pressing against my skin like warm hands. There was a vibration under my feet, through the floorboards, like something massive moving beneath the house, something that had been sleeping and was finally starting to wake up. The hardwood creaked, but not from my weight, from something else, something responding to my presence. I keep trying to remember what was in the drawer. My fingers remember the texture of paper, smooth and slightly warm, but paper isn't warm unless it's been touched recently, unless someone else had been holding it just before I found it. The thought makes my stomach turn because I lived alone. I've always lived alone. Haven't I? The clock was ticking, but the sound was all wrong, too slow, too deliberate, like it was counting down to something instead of just marking time. Each tick seemed to echo inside my skull, matching the rhythm of that humming that I can't quite catch. Tick hum, tick hum, tick hum. My reflection in the window was distorted that morning, not because of the glass, but because of what was looking back at me. The face was mine, but the eyes were different, wider, more aware, like they'd seen something I couldn't remember seeing, like they were keeping secrets from the rest of me. The air grew thick while I stood there, heavy and dense like breathing through wet cloth. Each breath became work, became conscious effort, and with each labored inhale came that metallic taste, stronger and more insistent. My lungs felt full of something that wasn't air. I remember touching my neck, feeling for something, a mark maybe, or a wound, but my skin was smooth, unmarked. Yet the sensation of fingers that weren't mine lingered there, ghostly pressure that made me shiver despite the growing warmth in the room. The curtains moved without wind. A gentle swaying that hypnotized me, drew my attention away from the drawer, away from whatever I'd been reaching for. Behind the fabric, shadows shifted and danced, creating shapes that almost looked familiar, almost looked like faces I should recognize. There's a gap here, a big one. I remember the curtains moving, and then I remember being on the floor. The hardwood was cold against my cheek, and there was wetness on my face that might have been tears or might have been something else. My clothes were different, or maybe they just felt different against my skin. The humming was louder then, not just in my bones, but filling the entire room, making the walls vibrate with its frequency. It had a pattern to it, like music or like speech in a language I'd never learned but somehow understood. It was calling to something, or calling something to me. My hands were shaking when I finally managed to sit up, not from fear, though fear was there too, from recognition, from the terrible certainty that this had happened before, that I'd been on this floor in this position, listening to this same impossible sound. How many times, how many mornings had I woken up with coffee-scented air and reached for that drawer? The patterns on the floor weren't from sunlight anymore. They were moving independently, crawling across the wood like living things. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, that made my eyes water and my head pound, but I couldn't look away. They were beautiful in their wrongness, mesmerizing in their impossibility. I think I laughed. The sound feels foreign in my memory, too high and too sharp, not my laugh. Someone else's laugh coming from my throat. The room seemed to respond to it, the humming growing more intense, more pleased, like it had been waiting for that specific sound. The drawer was fully open now, though I don't remember opening it. Inside was a photograph, just one. The paper was warm to the touch, almost hot, and the image showed the same room I was standing in. But in the photograph, I wasn't alone. There was someone else there, standing behind me, their hands on my shoulders. Their face was blurred, indistinct, but their presence felt overwhelmingly familiar. I know I should have been terrified, should have run, should have called someone for help, but the touch in the photograph felt comforting, like coming home after a long journey, like finally remembering something I'd forgotten I'd lost. The metallic taste was overwhelming now, coating my tongue and the back of my throat, but it wasn't unpleasant anymore. It was necessary, essential, like breathing or heartbeat or the slow circulation of blood through my veins. I could feel it changing me, preparing me for something I couldn't yet understand. My reflection in the window was clearer now. The eyes that looked back at me were definitely mine, but they held knowledge I didn't remember acquiring. They'd seen the contents of the drawer before. They'd felt those phantom hands on my shoulders. They'd heard the humming resolve into words I'm still not ready to understand. The room stopped holding its breath. Instead, it began to exhale, a long, slow release that carried with it the scent of pine and coffee and something else. Something organic and warm and alive. The air moved around me like an embrace, like welcome, like recognition of what I was becoming. I put the photograph back in the drawer, closed it gently. The lock clicked into place, though I don't remember it being locked before. The sound was final, decisive, like the end of one thing and the beginning of another. The sunlight returned to normal. The shadows fell where they should fall. The clock resumed its proper rhythm, but I was different. The humming had stopped, but I could still feel it inside me, dormant but not gone, waiting. I walked away from the drawer, made fresh coffee, sat in the chair by the window and tried to convince myself that nothing had happened, that the morning had been perfectly ordinary, perfectly normal. The taste in my mouth faded, the vibration under the floorboards stilled, the room became just a room again. But sometimes when I'm not paying attention, I catch myself humming. The same pattern, the same impossible melody. And when I do, the drawer rattles softly, like something inside is trying to get out. Or trying to call me back. The doctors say the memories will return gradually. That trauma affects everyone differently, that fragmented recollection is normal. They use words like dissociation and reconstruction and therapeutic process. But they don't understand that some memories aren't meant to be recovered. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. I stopped taking their pills 3 days ago. The humming is getting stronger. Story 4. The morning mist lingered longer than usual, swirling around the moss-covered stones that line the garden path. The scent of wet earth hung in the air, a prelude to autumn. An occasional rustle of leaves whispered secrets in the tranquil silence. Yet as I reached the front porch, the door sat ajar, creaking slightly in the breeze. Inside, the perfectly set breakfast table awaited, untouched, with one chair conspicuously turned to face the wall. The unsettling quiet stretched on, leaving a sense of something unfinished, something gone awry. I've been having the dreams again, not dreams exactly, fragments, pieces of something that feels too real to be sleeping, too strange to be waking. My skin remembers things my mind refuses to hold. There's a tingling that starts at the base of my neck and spreads downward like electricity finding water. It happens when I'm not expecting it, when I'm brushing my teeth, when I'm reaching for coffee, when I'm standing in rooms I don't remember entering. The humming started 3 weeks ago, or maybe it was 3 months. Time moves differently now, like honey poured through a sieve. The sound comes from everywhere and nowhere, a low frequency that makes my teeth ache. I've checked the refrigerator, the air conditioning, the power lines outside, nothing. But when I press my ear to the wall, the vibration travels through my bones. There were lights behind the trees. The chair faces the wall because I turned it that way. I remember doing it, but I don't remember why. My hands moved without asking permission. The wood felt warm under my palms, warmer than it should have been, warmer than wood ever gets. When I tried to turn it back, my fingers wouldn't grip properly. They slipped like the surface was coated in something I couldn't see. I keep finding myself in the garden at hours I shouldn't be there. The moss-covered stones feel different under my bare feet now. They pulse, gentle, rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of granite. The mist clings to my skin longer than mist should. It tastes metallic when I breathe too deeply, sharp, like pennies dissolved in rainwater. The breakfast table is always set for 2, but I live alone, have always lived alone. The second plate appears clean, but when I hold it up to the light, there are fingerprints that aren't mine, larger than mine. The fork beside it bears the faintest impression of teeth marks in the metal. Not bite marks, something gentler, something that tasted the silver. I don't remember ever coming back. The door creaks on a rhythm that doesn't match the wind. 3 short sounds, then silence. 3 more, then silence. I've oiled the hinges twice, but the pattern continues. Sometimes I stand in the doorway and count. 137 cycles before it stops. Always 137. When I reach 138, my counting starts over without my permission. My reflection in the bathroom mirror shows things that aren't there. Shadows moving behind me when the room is empty. A light source that doesn't exist casting brightness across my left shoulder. When I turn to look, there's nothing. When I turn back, the light has moved to my right shoulder. The mirror shows truth my eyes refuse to process. The tingling in my neck happens most often near the window that faces the backyard. The glass is always clean, though I don't remember cleaning it. Clean enough to see through perfectly, but sometimes what I see through it doesn't match what's actually there. The tree line shifts, branches that should be bare sprout leaves that shimmer like metal. The sky holds colors that don't have names. The noise didn't come from outside. I found marks on my arms this morning, not bruises, not cuts, impressions like someone pressed their fingers into clay and my skin held the memory. They don't hurt, but they're warm to the touch, warmer than my body temperature. When I trace them with my finger, the humming gets louder. The garden path leads somewhere different at night. I know this without walking it. The moss-covered stones rearrange themselves in patterns that pull the eye forward, deeper into spaces that shouldn't exist behind my house. The mist doesn't lift after sunset. It thickens, becomes almost solid, like walking through cobwebs made of light. Sleep brings no rest. I wake more tired than when I lay down, with the taste of ozone coating my tongue. My sheets are always perfectly smooth, as if I never moved during the night, but my feet are dirty, soil between my toes, grass stains on my heels. The dirt doesn't match anything from my yard. There were lights behind the trees. The humming has words now, not words I understand, but my mouth knows their shape. I catch myself forming syllables that feel ancient, important. My tongue moves against my teeth in patterns that seem rehearsed. When I try to repeat the sounds consciously, they slip away like water through cupped hands. The chair facing the wall has moved closer to it, an inch, maybe two. I measure the distance with my fingers each morning. The space grows smaller. The wood grain has changed, become more intricate, more alive. Patterns that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. When I press my palm against the back of the chair, my hand sinks slightly, as if the solid wood has learned to breathe. Time stops in certain rooms. I'll be walking from the kitchen to the living room, and suddenly I'm standing in the hallway watching dust motes hang motionless in a shaft of sunlight. My heart doesn't beat, my breath doesn't move, but I'm aware, completely aware of everything around me. The walls seem to expand and contract like lungs. The floorboards beneath my feet pulse with that same slow rhythm as the garden stones. I don't remember ever coming back. The second plate on the breakfast table holds residue now. Nothing visible, but when I run my finger across its surface, there's a texture, smooth and slightly warm. It tastes like copper when I touch my finger to my tongue afterward. The fork beside it is bent slightly, so subtly I almost miss it. The tines curve inward, as if something with incredible gentleness reshaped them while using them. My neighbor asked me about the lights. I don't remember having neighbors. I don't remember her face, just her voice through the phone, asking if I saw them too. The lights that dance between the trees behind my house. I told her no, but my voice said yes. My mouth moved without consulting my brain. After I hung up, I couldn't remember her number, her name, or if the conversation actually happened. The mirror in the bathroom reflects a room that's almost my bathroom. The tiles are the same color but arranged differently. The towel hangs on the wrong side. My reflection moves a fraction of a second behind my actual movements, like there's lag in the connection between what I do and what the mirror shows me doing. The tingling spreads further each day, from my neck to my shoulders, down my arms, across my chest. It's not unpleasant. It feels like recognition, like my body remembering something it's supposed to know. When the sensation reaches my fingertips, objects respond differently to my touch. Doors open before I turn the handle. Lights flicker on when I approach the switch. The noise didn't come from outside. I've started leaving the breakfast table set. Both plates, both forks, both cups. The routine feels necessary, though I can't explain why. Each morning the second setting shows signs of use. Subtle disturbances, a crumb that wasn't there the night before, a water ring on the placemat, the chair pulled out just enough for someone to have sat there. The garden path stones have developed a pattern, not in their arrangement but in their temperature. Every third stone runs warm, like it's been sitting in sunlight even during the coldest nights. When I kneel and press my ear to the warm stones, I can hear something moving beneath them. Not digging, not burrowing, moving with purpose, following the path underground. My dreams taste like metal now. I wake with the flavor coating my teeth, my gums, the inside of my cheeks. It's not unpleasant, just unfamiliar, like my mouth has been somewhere it doesn't belong. My pillow holds the scent of ozone, that sharp smell that comes before lightning strikes. The humming has developed harmonies, multiple frequencies layering over each other, creating something that's almost music, almost language. My body sways to rhythms I don't consciously hear. I find myself moving through the house in time with sounds that exist just below the threshold of my awareness. There were lights behind the trees. The chair facing the wall is now close enough to touch it. The wood grain has become so intricate it hurts to look at directly. Patterns within patterns, spiraling inward toward something my eyes can't quite follow. When I trace the designs with my finger, they feel carved, deliberate, but I know the chair was smooth when I first turned it toward the wall. I've stopped trying to remember when this all started. The effort makes my head feel hollow, like there's too much space inside my skull. Instead, I let the fragments come as they will. The tingling, the humming, the warm stones, the clean glass, the second plate. Each piece fits into a puzzle I'm not meant to solve, only experience. The mist doesn't dissipate anymore. It hangs around the garden path like it's waiting for something. When I walk through it, it parts reluctantly, clinging to my skin with an almost affectionate persistence. It whispers when it moves, soft sounds that might be words in a language I used to know. My reflection has started moving independently. Small movements, a tilt of the head when mine is straight, a blink when my eyes are open. The lag has become a lead, showing me what I'm about to do before I do it. Sometimes I change my mind just to see what happens. The reflection continues with the original action, creating a split second where we're doing different things entirely. I don't remember ever coming back. The second breakfast setting has become elaborate, not in what's there, but in how it's arranged. The fork placed at an exact angle, the cup turned so the handle points toward the window, the plate positioned with mathematical precision. I don't remember making these adjustments, but my hands know the measurements. My fingers find the correct positions without conscious thought. The warm stones in the garden path have begun to glow, not with visible light, but with something my eyes register as brightness. The glow pulses in sync with the humming, creating a rhythm that my heartbeat gradually matches. When I walk the path at night, each step coordinates with the pulse, as if I'm part of a larger circulation system. Time moves in circles now. I'll start making coffee and find myself back in bed. I'll begin brushing my teeth and discover I'm standing in the garden. The transitions happen without jarring, without confusion. Like stepping from one room into another, except the rooms are moments and the doors are made of something that isn't quite time. The noise didn't come from outside. The chair touching the wall has begun to merge with it. The boundary between wood and plaster grows indistinct. The grain patterns flow from the chair's surface onto the wall, creating designs that extend beyond what I can see. When I press my hand against where they meet, I can't tell where one surface ends and the other begins. My mouth forms words in languages that predate language. The sounds come automatically, usually when I'm focused on something else. Cooking, cleaning, staring out the window at the shifting tree line. The words feel important, like I'm maintaining something that requires regular attention, like I'm keeping a promise I don't remember making. The breakfast table has become an altar of routine. Each morning I set both places with increasing precision. Each evening I clear both places with equal care. The second setting always shows signs of use, but I never see anyone use it. Never hear anyone sit down or stand up. Never catch a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. The tingling has reached my feet now. When I walk, each step sends small electrical pulses up through my legs, connecting me to whatever moves beneath the garden stones. The sensation is becoming necessary. When I wear shoes, I feel disconnected, incomplete. I spend more time barefoot, letting the current complete its circuit through my body. There were lights behind the trees. The mist has developed currents, streams of vapor that flow in specific directions, carrying scents and sounds from places that don't exist on any map I know. When I breathe deeply, I taste distances, vast spaces, air that has traveled through chambers carved from something that isn't quite rock. My reflection now moves several seconds ahead of me. It shows me walking to the window before I decide to go there. shows me reaching for objects before I'm aware I need them. Sometimes I follow its lead, letting it guide my actions. Sometimes I resist, creating moments where the mirror shows someone who looks like me doing things I'm not doing. The humming has become a conversation. Multiple voices, though voice isn't the right word. Multiple sources of organized sound taking turns, responding to each other, building something together. I've become part of the exchange. My breathing, my heartbeat, my footsteps all contribute to the larger composition. The warm stones now form a complete circuit, every third stone creating a pattern that leads from the garden path around the house back to the garden path. When I follow the warm stones barefoot, the tingling in my body intensifies until I can feel the electrical connection between all living things, the trees, the grass, the insects, the things that move underground. I don't remember ever coming back. The chair has disappeared into the wall, not vanished, absorbed. The wood grain patterns now cover an area 3 times the chair's original size, spiraling outward in designs that seem to move when I'm not looking directly at them. When I press my ear to the wall where the chair used to be, I hear something that might be breathing. The second breakfast setting has begun setting itself. I'll come downstairs to find the plate positioned, the fork angled, the cup turned. Each piece placed with the same mathematical precision my hands have learned but completed while I was sleeping, or while I was standing in the garden with no memory of how I got there. My dreams have become shared experiences. I'm aware of another presence, not threatening, not comforting, just there. We move through spaces that exist only during sleep, spaces with more dimensions than my waking mind can process. When I wake, I'm not alone in the knowledge of where we've been. The mist now responds to my presence. It parts when I approach, swirls when I move, settles when I stand still. The patterns it makes are too organized to be random, too complex to be simple air currents. It's writing messages in a script that bypasses my eyes and speaks directly to something deeper. The noise didn't come from outside. The bathroom mirror reflects a room that's becoming less and less like my bathroom. The tiles shift color subtly. The fixtures change position by degrees. My reflection moves independently now, sometimes leaving the frame entirely while I remain standing in front of the glass. When it returns, it's carrying knowledge I don't remember acquiring. The tingling has become a permanent condition, not uncomfortable, just constant, like a low-level electrical current running through my nervous system, keeping me connected to something larger than my individual body. When I touch objects now, I can feel their history, their composition, their purpose in ways that have nothing to do with their appearance. The garden path stones have begun to sing, not audibly but in frequencies I feel rather than hear. Each step creates harmonics that resonate through the ground, through my bones, through the air itself. The song is ancient, patient, welcoming. It's been waiting for someone who could hear it properly. Time has become fluid. I exist in multiple moments simultaneously. I'm setting the breakfast table and clearing it and eating from it all at once. I'm walking the garden path and standing in the mist and pressing my ear to the warm stones in the same eternal now. Past and present and future collapse into a single, continuous experience. There were lights behind the trees. The wall where the chair disappeared has become a gateway, not visually but functionally. When I approach it, I can sense vast spaces beyond the plaster, chambers that extend far beyond the physical boundaries of my house. Sometimes I hear echoes of my own footsteps coming from the other side, as if I'm walking there while I'm walking here. The breakfast table exists in a state of constant preparation and completion. The second setting is always in use and always empty, always disturbed and always perfect. I've stopped questioning the contradiction. Some truths can only be experienced, never understood. My reflection has stopped pretending to be me. It moves through the mirror world independently, living a parallel existence that occasionally intersects with mine. Sometimes we wave to each other. Sometimes we simply acknowledge each other's presence with a nod. We're becoming different people, or perhaps we always were. The humming has evolved into something that might be called music if music could exist in more than 4 dimensions. I'm no longer just listening to it, I'm part of it. My heartbeat, my breathing, my thoughts all contribute to a composition that spans distances I can't measure and involves participants I can't see. I don't remember ever coming back. The mist has become a living thing. It moves with intention, communicates through density and temperature, responds to my emotional state with changes in texture and flow. When I'm calm, it settles around me like a blanket. When I'm curious, it swirls and dances, showing me patterns that exist just beyond comprehension. The warm stones now pulse in perfect synchronization with my heartbeat, or perhaps my heartbeat has synchronized with them. The distinction no longer matters. We're part of the same system now, the same circulation of energy that flows through the ground, through the air, through the spaces between spaces. The second breakfast setting has become a portal for presence. Someone sits there regularly now, someone I can sense but not see, someone who uses the fork and drinks from the cup and leaves impressions in the chair. We eat together in silence, 2 beings sharing the same space across different dimensions of existence. The noise didn't come from outside. My house has become larger inside than outside. Rooms extend beyond their walls. Hallways lead to places that shouldn't exist. The garden path continues through the living room, across the kitchen, up the stairs, connecting all spaces in a single, continuous circuit of warm stones and flowing mist. I've stopped trying to remember who I was before this began. That person feels like someone I knew briefly, someone whose memories I inherited but whose experiences weren't quite my own. I'm becoming something new, something that exists in harmony with the humming, the tingling, the warm stones, the patient mist. The morning routine continues, but now it includes acknowledgement of the presence that shares my space. I set both places at the breakfast table. I turn the chair to face the wall, or perhaps the wall has moved to face the chair. I walk the garden path barefoot, feeling the warm stones pulse beneath my feet, breathing the metallic mist, listening to the harmonies that exist just below the threshold of ordinary hearing. There were lights behind the trees. The morning mist lingers longer than usual, swirling around the moss-covered stones that line the garden path. The scent of wet earth hangs in the air, a prelude to something that hasn't happened yet. An occasional rustle of leaves whispers secrets in the tranquil silence. Yet as I reach the front porch, the door sits ajar, creaking slightly in the breeze. Inside, the perfectly set breakfast table awaits, both settings disturbed, both chairs turned to face the wall. The unsettling quiet stretches on, leaving a sense of something beginning, something perfectly arranged. Story 5. The clock's hands trembled, pausing between ticks, leaving the seconds unsigned. The floor seemed softer today, my steps sinking deeper as though the wood remembered my path. Yesterday's coffee stain on the countertop mirrored itself unexpectedly, a double blemish with no recollection of the spill. The air was thick with unsaid words, hovering just beyond hearing, taunting clarity. I reached for the door, expecting resistance, a familiar creak. Smooth motion and unprompted glide, and the room beyond was slightly askew, an unfamiliar echo. a shifted presence, something here that wasn't before. I've been living with this for weeks now. The symptoms, I call them, though that word feels inadequate for what I experience each night. Sleep comes in fragments, broken by the sound of my radio turning itself on at frequencies that shouldn't exist. The static carries patterns, rhythms that almost form words but never quite reach meaning. I unplug every electronic device before bed, yet the humming persists, vibrating through the walls like a heartbeat in the bones of this place. My neighbors think I'm losing my grip on reality. When I mention the lights that appear outside my window, casting no shadows despite their intensity, they exchange those careful glances people reserve for the unstable. The beams move with purpose, sweeping across the yard in geometric patterns that feel deliberate, methodical. They never illuminate anything, these lights. They seem to absorb the darkness rather than dispel it. The headache started around the same time. Not pain exactly, but pressure, as if something were expanding inside my skull. My vision blurs at the edges, and sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral sight that vanishes when I turn to look directly. The sensation of being observed has become constant, a weight pressing against my back even when I'm alone in locked rooms. I've stopped answering my phone. The calls come at irregular intervals, displaying numbers that don't exist, combinations of digits that shouldn't be possible. When I pick up, there's only that same rhythmic static, occasionally punctuated by what might be breathing or might be the sound of air moving through spaces too vast to comprehend. The silence between the sounds feels expectant, waiting for something I can't provide. My memory has become unreliable. I find myself in rooms with no recollection of entering them, holding objects I don't remember picking up. Yesterday I discovered I'd arranged all the furniture in perfect circles, each piece positioned with mathematical precision. The sight of it filled me with a dread I couldn't name, yet I couldn't bring myself to move anything back to its original place. The dreams are the worst part, not nightmares exactly, but visions so vivid they feel more real than waking life. I'm always in the same location, that isolated stretch where everything began, watching events unfold from a perspective that shifts and changes like a camera with its own will. In these dreams, I see myself from the outside, and the person I observe seems to know things the dreaming me has forgotten. When I try to piece together what actually happened, the memories resist organization. They come in flashes, disconnected scenes that might belong to someone else's life. The clearest image is of a figure standing motionless against the tree line, impossibly tall and perfectly still. Not hiding, not threatening, just present in a way that defied natural law. The distance between us seemed to fluctuate, as if space itself were unreliable. This figure appeared during what I've come to think of as the main event, though that phrase makes it sound more dramatic than it felt at the time. There was no sound, no movement, no obvious threat, just the gradual realization that something fundamental about reality had shifted. The air around me became dense, almost liquid, and my thoughts moved through it like objects sinking through water. I remember trying to call out, but my voice produced no sound, not because I couldn't speak, but because the air refused to carry the vibrations. The silence was so complete it had texture, pressing against my eardrums like cotton soaked in something heavier than water. Time moved differently during those moments, stretching and contracting without pattern or reason. The figure never moved closer, never gestured or communicated in any way I could understand. It simply existed, and its existence changed everything around it. The familiar landscape became foreign, angles shifting subtly, distances becoming meaningless. I knew I was witnessing something that shouldn't be possible, yet my mind accepted it with a calm that now seems more disturbing than the event itself. Looking back further, I can identify the warning signs I ignored at the time. The electrical disturbances had been building for days before the encounter. My radio would tune itself to empty frequencies, producing sounds like whale songs played through damaged speakers. The lights in my temporary shelter flickered in sequences that felt like Morse code, though I could never decode the message. The temperature fluctuations were subtle but constant. Pockets of cold air would form in corners, dense enough to feel solid against my skin. The metallic taste in my mouth grew stronger each day, accompanied by a smell like ozone mixed with something organic and unfamiliar. My compass spun freely, unable to find magnetic north, as if the fundamental forces that govern direction had abandoned this place. Sleep became elusive during those preliminary days, not from fear or anxiety, but from a hyper-awareness that made rest impossible. Every sound seemed amplified and distorted, natural noises twisted into something almost musical. The wind through the trees carried harmonics that shouldn't exist, creating chords that resonated in my chest cavity. I found myself drawn to certain spots in the landscape, areas that looked identical to everywhere else but felt charged with potential energy. Standing in these locations, I could sense movement beneath the ground, not geological but purposeful, as if something vast were slowly shifting position far below the surface. The sensation traveled up through my feet and into my spine, a vibration too low to hear but impossible to ignore. My equipment began malfunctioning in ways that suggested intelligence rather than random failure. The camera would activate on its own, taking pictures of empty sky at precise intervals. When I reviewed the images later, they showed nothing unusual, yet staring at them produced the same unsettling sensation as looking directly at the source of these disturbances. The final piece of the puzzle, the earliest memory I can recover, takes me back to the moment of arrival. Everything seemed perfectly normal then, almost aggressively ordinary. The site I'd chosen for my temporary stay appeared ideal, isolated enough for solitude but accessible enough for safety. The landscape rolled away in gentle hills covered with the kind of vegetation that belongs in nature documentaries about peaceful wilderness. I remember the satisfaction of setting up camp, the simple pleasure of organizing my few possessions in a space that would be home for several days. The weather was mild, the light soft and golden, the kind of evening that makes you grateful for the decision to spend time away from civilization. Birds called from the surrounding trees, their songs familiar and comforting. There was no indication that anything unusual was about to begin. No ominous feelings, no supernatural warnings, no sense of being watched from the shadows. Just the quiet contentment of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for, a place to exist without complication or interference. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades that belonged in travel brochures. I had no way of knowing that this peaceful scene was the last normal moment I would experience, that something was already moving toward this location with purpose I couldn't imagine. The figure that would later stand motionless at the edge of my vision was perhaps already present, waiting with the patience of something that experiences time differently than we do. In that final moment of innocence, I watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, unaware that soon I would see lights among them that followed no celestial pattern, that moved with intention across the vast emptiness above. The peace of that evening now feels like a held breath, a pause before something immense and incomprehensible announced its presence in ways that would leave me forever changed. Even now, as I try to convince myself that it's over, that whatever happened was isolated to that place and time, I can feel it watching from somewhere beyond the edge of perception, patient and persistent, waiting for the right moment to remind me that some encounters leave marks that never fully heal. Story 6. It wasn't the first time the hallway creaked late at night. The floorboards had always been temperamental, groaning under the weight of time more than any real pressure. I never thought much of it, accustomed to the subtle whispers of an old house. The light outside flickered occasionally, casting uneven shadows that never quite aligned with the furniture. The door to the study remained ajar, though I could swear it was closed when I last checked. I noticed the dust had shifted on the mantel, a hint of a pattern that didn't quite seem right. I decided not to follow the faint trail of prints to the back door. Instead, I closed the door to my room and let it remain unlocked. The first dream came on a Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday. The days had been blending together lately, each one carrying the weight of the last. I found myself in my bedroom, but not quite my bedroom. Everything was where it should be, yet somehow displaced by inches. The window faced the wrong direction. The wallpaper held a pattern I didn't recognize, though it felt familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. There was a light outside the window, not the street light I was used to, but something else. An oval glow, steady and patient, hovering just beyond the glass. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just breathed with a slow, rhythmic pulse. I watched it for what felt like hours, though my body remained perfectly still, as if I were observing from somewhere else entirely. When I woke, the morning felt thin, like tissue paper stretched too tight. I dismissed it as stress. Work had been demanding lately, and sleep had become a luxury I could barely afford. The mind plays tricks when it's tired, creates connections where none exist. That's what I told myself as I brushed my teeth and noticed the toothbrush was slightly damp, though I couldn't remember using it the night before. The second dream arrived 3 nights later, or perhaps it was the same night stretched across multiple sleeps. Time moved differently there, thick and viscous like honey poured from a great height. I was in the bedroom again, the wrong right bedroom with its displaced furniture and unfamiliar wallpaper. The oval light was still there, but closer now, pressing against the window with an urgency I could feel in my bones. This time there was sound, a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the walls, the floor, my own chest. It was like someone was tuning a radio to a frequency that existed just beyond human perception, adjusting the dial with infinite patience. The sound wrapped around me, through me, until I couldn't tell where it ended and I began. The light pulsed in rhythm with the hum, and I realized I was no longer lying in bed. I was standing at the window, though I had no memory of moving. My hand was pressed against the glass, and the surface was warm, almost alive. Through the window I could see my own reflection, but it was wrong. The face looking back at me held an expression I wasn't making, eyes wide with recognition of something I couldn't quite grasp. Behind my reflection, shapes moved in the darkness, tall, angular forms that seemed to bend light around them, creating pockets of deeper shadow in an already dark room. They didn't approach, didn't retreat, just existed in that space between presence and absence. One of them might have been speaking, its voice a metallic whisper that blended with the hum until I couldn't separate the words from the sound. I woke with my palm still tingling, as if I'd been pressing it against something hot. The sensation lingered throughout the day, a phantom warmth that made me flex my fingers repeatedly. I found myself checking the bedroom window, running my hand along the glass, searching for some evidence of heat, some proof that what I'd experienced was more than neural misfiring. That afternoon, I discovered the first trace, a small smudge on the window right where my dream hand had pressed against the glass. The mark was perfectly oval, about the size of a palm, and when I touched it, the glass felt different there. Smoother, almost slick, as if it had been heated and cooled repeatedly. I cleaned it away with glass cleaner, but the texture remained, a subtle imperfection that caught light differently than the rest of the window. The electronics in the house began acting strangely around the same time. The radio would tune itself to static-filled frequencies, producing sounds that almost resembled the hum from my dreams. The television would flicker on by itself, displaying snow-filled channels that shouldn't have existed on a digital system. My phone would lose signal in certain rooms, the bars dropping to nothing whenever I approached the bedroom window. I started keeping a journal, documenting these small anomalies with the methodical precision of someone trying to prove their own sanity. Each entry was a small rebellion against the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with my perception of reality. The pen felt strange in my hand, too light, as if it were made of hollow bones instead of plastic and metal. The third dream didn't wait for night. It came during what I thought was an afternoon nap, sliding into my consciousness like water through cracks in stone. This time I wasn't in the bedroom at all. I was floating, suspended in a space that had no walls, no floor, no ceiling. The oval light was everywhere, surrounding me, pulsing with that same patient rhythm. The hum was louder now, no longer a background frequency, but a living thing that spoke in harmonics I could almost understand. It told me things without words, showed me images without pictures. I saw myself from above, lying on what might have been a table, though it felt more like floating on the surface of perfectly still water. My body was motionless, but my mind was achingly alert, cataloging every sensation with crystalline clarity. The shapes were clearer here, no longer hiding behind reflections and shadows. They moved with purpose, their angular forms shifting and reconfiguring like geometric puzzles solving themselves. They didn't touch me, but I felt their attention like weight pressing down on my consciousness with gentle, inexorable force. One of them leaned closer, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been a face, all smooth curves and impossible angles. Time bent around itself in that place. I experienced minutes that lasted hours, hours that compressed into heartbeats. I watched myself from multiple angles simultaneously, saw my own face wearing expressions of wonder, terror, and something else I couldn't name. The metallic voice was clearer now, speaking in a language that bypassed my ears entirely and wrote itself directly onto my thoughts. When I finally surfaced from that dream, the sun had moved across the sky in a way that suggested either minutes or hours had passed. I couldn't tell which, and the uncertainty gnawed at me like hunger. My body felt different, lighter somehow, as if parts of me had been temporarily removed and then carefully replaced. There was a soreness in my muscles that spoke of movement I couldn't remember, positions I'd never held. The journal entries became more erratic after that. My handwriting changed subtly, letters forming differently, words appearing on the page that I didn't remember writing. I would find entries describing experiences I couldn't recall having, conversations with people I'd never met, observations about places I'd never been. The pen still felt wrong in my hand, but now it felt wrong in a familiar way, like wearing someone else's clothes that had somehow been tailored to fit perfectly. The boundary between sleeping and waking began to dissolve. I would be washing dishes and suddenly find myself standing in the kitchen, hands submerged in water that had gone cold hours ago. I would be reading a book and realize I'd been staring at the same page for an indeterminate amount of time, the words rearranging themselves into patterns that almost made sense. The hum followed me everywhere now, a constant companion that no one else seemed to hear. People started commenting on my appearance. I looked tired, they said, but also somehow more alert. My eyes were brighter, they claimed, though I felt as if I were seeing everything through a thin film of water. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more layered, textures more complex. It was as if someone had adjusted the contrast on reality, turning up the saturation until everything hummed with barely contained energy. The oval light began appearing during the day. Not outside the window anymore, but reflected in mirrors, puddles, any surface that could hold an image. It was always there when I looked directly, gone when I tried to point it out to others. The light had a quality that reminded me of recognition, as if it were trying to catch my attention, trying to remind me of something important I'd forgotten. I started finding marks on my body that I couldn't explain, not injuries exactly, but impressions. Small, circular indentations on my arms and legs that felt like the after effects of gentle pressure. They didn't hurt, but they were warm to the touch, radiating heat that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than skin. When I showed them to others, they saw nothing, or claimed the marks were so faint they could be anything. The fourth dream, if it was a dream, lasted for what felt like days. I was back in the floating space, but this time I wasn't alone. There were others there, suspended in the same gentle embrace of light and sound. They looked like me, but not quite. Variations on a theme, faces that could have been mine if I'd made different choices, lived different lives, been born into different circumstances. We didn't speak, but we communicated through the hum, sharing thoughts and memories that flowed between us like water finding its level. I experienced their lives, their dreams, their own confusion about the nature of this place. Some of them had been coming here longer than others. Some seemed to understand what was happening, while others, like me, were still grappling with the impossibility of it all. The angular shapes moved among us with practiced efficiency, tending to us like gardeners caring for delicate plants. They adjusted something in each of us, fine-tuning frequencies I didn't know I possessed. When they touched me, and they did touch me, their contact felt like cool metal and warm flesh simultaneously, a contradiction that my mind couldn't resolve but my body accepted without question. I learned things in that place, though I couldn't have said what exactly. The knowledge came in waves, washing over me and receding before I could grasp it fully. I understood that this had been happening for longer than I had realized, that the dreams were just the surface of something much deeper. The oval light wasn't just light, but a doorway, an invitation, a key to a lock I didn't know existed. When I returned to what I thought of as waking life, everything had changed. The house felt smaller, more fragile, like a soap bubble that could pop at any moment. The familiar objects around me seemed like props in a play I'd forgotten I was performing in. The journal had new entries, pages and pages of text in my handwriting describing experiences. I could almost remember technical details about processes I didn't understand, diagrams of machines that looked like they'd been drawn by someone with intimate knowledge of their construction. The phone calls started after that, not voices exactly, but sounds that might have been voices if played at the right speed, filtered through the right equipment. The calls came at regular intervals, always when I was alone, always lasting exactly the same amount of time. When I tried to record them, the playback was nothing but static, though I could swear I heard meaning in the white noise. My reflection began acting independently, not dramatically, just small discrepancies. It would blink a fraction of a second after I did, or turn its head slightly in a direction I hadn't moved. When I smiled, it smiled back, but the expression held a knowledge that I didn't possess, as if my reflection had access to information I was being denied. I started avoiding mirrors, but that only made the problem worse. Without visual confirmation, I began to doubt the reality of my own physical presence. The fifth dream came while I was awake, overlaying reality like a double-exposed photograph. I was in my living room, but also in the floating space. I could see both simultaneously, the familiar furniture ghost-like and translucent, the geometric shapes moving through my mundane world with casual disregard for the laws of physics I'd always taken for granted. The hum was no longer just a sound, but a presence, intelligent and patient. It spoke to me in harmonics that bypassed language entirely, downloading information directly into my consciousness. I learned that the dreams weren't dreams, but memories. Not my memories exactly, but memories of experiences my body had undergone while my conscious mind was elsewhere, stored away like files in a cabinet I'd never known existed. The oval light appeared in my living room, hovering near the ceiling with the same patient pulse I'd grown to associate with profound change. It cast no shadows, reflected off no surfaces, existed in a space that was somehow separate from the room while occupying the same coordinates. I reached toward it, and my hand passed through what felt like warm honey, thick and yielding but ultimately insubstantial. The realization came not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual recognition, like remembering a word that had been on the tip of my tongue. This wasn't happening to me. This was me. The experiences, the floating, the gentle examinations, the careful adjustments, they weren't being done to me by others. They were part of a process I was participating in willingly, had always been participating in, would continue to participate in regardless of my conscious understanding. The journal entries made sense now, written by a version of myself that existed in those floating moments, recording observations and experiences that my everyday consciousness wasn't equipped to retain. The marks on my body were evidence of procedures I'd consented to, changes being made to improve something I couldn't quite define. The electronic interference was a side effect of alterations to my nervous system, upgrades that allowed me to perceive frequencies beyond normal human range. I stopped trying to distinguish between dreams and waking life. The categories had become meaningless, arbitrary divisions in a continuous experience that flowed like water through different containers. I was always in both states simultaneously, always floating while walking, always humming while speaking, always seeing the oval light whether my eyes were open or closed. The final dream began like the first, with me lying in the wrong right bedroom, watching the oval light pulse beyond the window. But this time I knew what it meant. The light wasn't outside at all. It was inside, had always been inside, a part of me that I was finally learning to recognize. The hum wasn't coming from elsewhere, but from within, my own frequency finally tuned to match something larger than myself. I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the glass exactly as I had in every previous dream. But this time, when I looked at my reflection, I saw not my face but something else. Something that had been there all along, waiting patiently for me to stop looking away. The angular shapes weren't in the room with me. They were me, had always been me, would always be me. The glass under my palm began to warm, then to soften, then to flow like liquid around my fingers. I pushed through it as easily as pushing through water, stepping from the bedroom into the floating space, from the dream into the reality I'd been avoiding. The transition was seamless, natural, like coming home after a long journey to a place I'd never actually left. But as I turned back to look at the window I just passed through, I saw something that shouldn't have been possible. My body was still there, still lying in the bed, still sleeping peacefully. And on the nightstand next to the bed where I'd never placed it, sat the journal, open to a page covered in handwriting that wasn't quite mine, describing this exact moment in perfect detail. The oval light pulsed once, twice, and I understood that this was just the beginning, story 7. I mentioned that the door had stayed shut. The air hung heavy with the scent of old varnish, wrapping around me like a question waiting to be answered. Shadows stretched across the floor in long, accusing lines as if each plank remembered the weight of hesitant steps. A faint ticking pulsed in the walls, setting my teeth on edge. Light slanted in through the narrow gap under the door, marking time that I claimed hadn't passed. My fingers, dry and chalky, sketched invisible patterns on my sleeve, the residue of a room I supposedly never entered. But the latch's echo still resonated in my ear. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does, I need to tell you something I've never told another living soul. something that sits in my chest like a stone, growing heavier with each passing day, each sleepless night, each moment I catch my reflection and wonder if the person staring back is still me. You'll think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. Maybe I lost it already, somewhere between the first time I heard that sound and the moment I realized no one else could hear it. But I have to write this down. I have to leave it somewhere, like breadcrumbs in a forest I can't find my way out of. The door, I keep coming back to the door. It was in the house where I was staying, a temporary arrangement, they said, just until things settled down. The kind of place where the floorboards whisper secrets and the walls hold their breath. I told everyone the door stayed shut. I told myself the door stayed shut, but my hands remember the coolness of that brass handle. My palms still feel the slight resistance as it turned. There's this sound that comes back to me. Not a voice exactly, more like the space between voices. Like listening to a conversation through water, where the words dissolve but the intention remains, pressing against your eardrums until they ache. It starts soft, almost gentle, then builds into something that makes your teeth feel loose in your skull. I hear it now as I write this. Do you hear it too? The first time was during one of those in-between hours, not quite evening, not quite night. I was sitting in the front room trying to read when that ticking in the walls grew louder, insistent, like Morse code tapped out by fingernails against wood. My skin prickled the way it does when someone's watching you, but when I looked up, the room was empty. Except for the light under that door, thin and golden, moving like water. I should have left then, should have packed my things and found somewhere else to stay. But you know how it is when something hooks into you, when curiosity becomes a kind of hunger that gnaws at your ribs until you feed it. So I fed it. The chalk dust on my fingers, I can't explain that. It wasn't there before I approached the door, but afterward my hands were coated with it. Fine white powder that tasted like old bones when I absently touched my lips. I washed and washed, but traces of it lingered under my nails for days. Inside that room, and I'm not supposed to remember being inside that room, the air moved differently. Thicker, like breathing through gauze. The walls seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat, and the floor felt soft beneath my feet, as if I were walking on something that had once been alive. There were others there. I think there were others there. Not people exactly, more like the impression of people. Shadows that held their shape a moment too long. Whispers that brushed against my neck like cold fingers. I remember reaching out, trying to touch one of them, and my hand passed through something that felt like static electricity made solid. They knew me, somehow they knew me. The worst part isn't what I saw in that room. The worst part is what I've been seeing since. My reflection in mirrors has started to lag, just by a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. When I raise my hand, there's a pause before the reflection follows. When I smile, the face in the glass looks surprised, as if it didn't expect the expression. People look through me now, not past me, through me, like I'm becoming transparent around the edges. The mailman handed me letters yesterday and his fingers passed through mine. He didn't seem to notice, just smiled and walked away, whistling. I tried to tell someone, my sister, I think, but when I opened my mouth, that sound came out instead, that space between voices sound. She looked confused, tilted her head like she was trying to hear something just out of range, then asked if I was feeling all right. Was I feeling all right? The question echoes in my head now, bouncing off the inside of my skull like a marble in an empty jar. Am I feeling all right? Am I feeling at all? Sometimes I press my fingers to my wrist, searching for a pulse. Sometimes I find one, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm not sure if the rhythm I feel is my heart or that ticking in the walls, following me wherever I go. The room is spreading, that's the only way I can describe it. What was behind that door is seeping out, bleeding into the world like ink and water. I see it in the corners of my vision, that golden light, those moving shadows. I feel it in the way time seems to skip, leaving gaps in my memory like missing pages from a book. Did I ever really leave that room? Or am I still there, writing this letter on air, leaving words that will dissolve before anyone can read them? You're probably wondering why I'm telling you this, why I'm leaving this confession for someone to find. The truth is, I'm not sure you'll be able to read it. I'm not sure I'm actually writing it, but I need to try. I need to believe that some part of me is still here, still real enough to leave a mark. If you can read this, if these words exist somewhere outside my fading consciousness, then maybe there's hope. Maybe the door can be closed again. Maybe what I've become can be undone. But I don't think so. The ticking is getting louder now. The light under the door, every door is getting brighter. My fingers are starting to feel chalky again, and when I look down at this paper, I can see through my hands to the words beneath. I'm sorry I opened the door. I'm sorry I let them see me. I'm sorry I'm leaving this burden for you to carry. But mostly I'm sorry that I can't remember your face anymore. Can't remember anyone's face. Can't remember my own. The room is calling me back now. I can feel it pulling at the edges of what's left of me, drawing me in like tide drawing sand into the sea. I don't think I can resist much longer. I don't think I want to. If you find this letter, don't look for me. Don't try to find that door. Some things are meant to stay closed. Some rooms are meant to remain empty. But if you hear that sound, that space between voices sound, if you see that golden light seeping under a door that should be shut, run. Run and don't look back. Don't make the same mistake I made. Don't feed the hunger. The ticking has stopped now. The silence is somehow worse. It presses against my ears like deep water, and I can feel myself sinking into it. The words on this page are starting to blur, or maybe it's my eyes that are blurring. Maybe I'm the one who's blurring. I can see the door opening now. That beautiful, terrible golden light spilling out like honey, like blood, like something that has no name in any language spoken by the living. They're waiting for me. They've been waiting all along. I'm going home now, back to the room where time moves differently, and shadows hold their shape, and the air tastes like chalk and old memories. Don't mourn for me. I'm not sure there's anything left to mourn. Just remember to keep the doors closed. Keep them closed. Keep them. Story 8. Every morning I find the key laid neatly on the mantelpiece. It always seemed to be just another forgotten item in my cluttered home. Yet every evening I return to see it missing, only to find it back again the next day. At first I chalked it up to absent-mindedness, blamed my disorganization for the cycle. But yesterday I noticed the key aligned differently, as if someone had carefully adjusted its position. Today it is back where it always should be, but now I wonder if it's just that I never knew where it really belonged. I've been staring at this recording device for months now. Bought it, set it up, then let it collect dust while I found excuse after excuse not to press that red button. My hands shake every time I reach for it, not from age, not from illness, but from something deeper. Something that's been growing inside me like a slow poison since I left that place. I'm safe now, at least that's what I tell myself every morning when I wake up in this small apartment, 3 states away from where it all happened. The walls here are thin, the neighbors loud, the traffic constant. but somehow all that noise feels like protection, like a barrier between me and the silence I left behind. It's been years since I found the courage to even think about telling someone. Years of convincing myself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe some kind of breakdown. But the dreams won't stop. And lately, things have been happening here too. Small things, things that remind me I might never really escape what I experienced back then. I need to tell someone. I need to get this out before it consumes what's left of my sanity. I was working as a caretaker for an old research facility. Nothing glamorous, just maintenance and security for a building that had been mostly abandoned for decades. The pay was decent, and the isolation suited me at the time. I was going through a difficult period in my life, needed space to think, to heal from some personal losses I won't get into here. The facility sat on several acres of wooded land, surrounded by chain-link fencing that had seen better days. Most of the complex had been shut down, but a few sections still housed some kind of ongoing projects. I was told to avoid those areas, stick to the main corridors and common spaces. My job was simple: walk the halls twice a day, check that doors were locked, make sure no pipes had burst or windows been broken. Basic stuff. The building itself was from the 50s, all concrete and steel, with those long fluorescent lights that hummed constantly and cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. During the day it felt institutional but harmless, just another forgotten piece of government architecture slowly returning to nature. But at night, when I'd make my evening rounds, the place took on a different character entirely. I lived in a small apartment they'd converted from office space on the 3rd floor. It wasn't much, but it had everything I needed: a bed, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that worked most of the time. The windows looked out over the parking lot and the woods beyond. In the beginning, I found the view peaceful, trees swaying in the wind, the occasional deer wandering through the clearing. It felt like a retreat from the world. For the first few weeks, everything was exactly as boring as I'd expected. I'd wake up, make coffee, do my morning walk through, then spend the day reading or working on small repair projects around the building. The evening rounds became routine. Check the ground floor, make sure the main entrance was secure, test the emergency lighting, then back upstairs to my apartment. The only other person I saw regularly was a security guard who worked the night shift on weekends. We'd nod to each other in passing, exchange a few words about the weather or the building's quirks, but we weren't there to socialize. The solitude was exactly what I thought I wanted. It was during my 3rd week that I first noticed something odd. I was doing my evening rounds, walking down the main corridor on the 2nd floor, when I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere behind me. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. All the doors I could see were closed, same as always. I stood there for a moment, listening, but heard nothing except the usual hum of the ventilation system. I convinced myself it was just the building settling. Old places make noise, especially at night when the temperature drops. I continued my rounds and didn't think much more about it. But then it happened again the next night. Same corridor, same sound. This time I was more alert, more focused on pinpointing where it came from. I retraced my steps, checking each door I'd passed. They were all locked, just as they should be. Most led to empty offices or storage rooms I'd already inspected during my first week. Nothing had changed. Still, I started paying closer attention during my walks. I began to notice other small things that seemed slightly off. A chair in one of the common areas that I could have sworn was positioned differently than the day before. A window in the stairwell that was open just a crack, even though I was certain I'd closed it. Tiny details that could easily be explained by faulty memory or simple oversight. The building had motion sensor lighting in most areas, designed to save energy in the largely unused space. The lights would flicker on as I approached, then fade out a few minutes after I'd passed. It was an efficient system, but it created an odd effect where I was always walking in a bubble of artificial light surrounded by darkness. Sometimes, in my peripheral vision, I'd catch what looked like lights turning on in areas I hadn't been near. When I'd turn to look directly, everything would be dark. I started making notes in a small journal, not because I thought anything supernatural was happening, but because I was beginning to doubt my own perceptions. I wanted to track whether these incidents were increasing or if I was just becoming more paranoid in the isolation. The notes were mundane: door sound, second floor, 9:15 p.m. Chair moved in break room, lights in east wing. Reading back through those entries now, I can see the progression. What started as occasional oddities became daily occurrences, and my handwriting, usually neat and controlled, grew increasingly erratic as the weeks went on. The first really unsettling incident happened about a month into my stay. I was in my apartment reading before bed when I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed to pause right outside my door. I waited for a knock, thinking maybe the weekend security guard needed something, but it never came. The footsteps resumed, moving away down the hall. I opened my door and looked out. The corridor was empty, lit only by the emergency lighting that stayed on all night. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but got no response. I walked to the stairwell and listened for sounds from the floors below. Nothing. When I went back to my apartment, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The motion sensor light in the hallway had never turned on. Those lights were sensitive enough to detect a cat walking by, yet somehow I'd heard footsteps without triggering any of the sensors. That night I barely slept. Every small sound the building made seemed amplified, potentially threatening. I found myself listening for those footsteps to return, but they didn't, at least not that night. I started carrying a flashlight during my rounds, even though the building's lighting was adequate. Something about having that extra source of illumination made me feel more secure. I also began varying my routine, taking different routes through the building, changing the times of my walks. If someone was watching me, learning my patterns, I wanted to make it harder for them. But the incidents continued, doors that should have been locked standing slightly ajar, the faint smell of cigarette smoke in areas where smoking had been prohibited for decades, and always that sense of being observed, of not being quite as alone as I appeared to be. The electronic equipment in the building started behaving strangely. The PA system, which hadn't been used in years, would occasionally emit a brief burst of static. The old intercoms in some of the offices would crackle to life for a few seconds before going silent again. I checked the main electrical panel multiple times, looking for loose connections or failing components, but everything appeared to be in working order. It was around this time that I started experiencing physical symptoms, a persistent feeling of pressure in my chest, especially when I was near any kind of electronic device. My skin would break out in goosebumps for no apparent reason, usually when I was walking through certain sections of the building. The sensation was so consistent that I began to dread entering those areas. I also noticed changes in my sleep patterns. I'd always been a sound sleeper, but now I was waking up multiple times each night. Often I'd find myself sitting up in bed fully alert, as if some sound had startled me awake, but when I'd listen carefully, there was only silence. During one of these midnight wake-ups, I heard something that changed everything. It was a low humming sound, almost below the threshold of hearing, not the familiar hum of the ventilation system or the electrical equipment, but something else. Something that seemed to pulse and shift in frequency, like a signal trying to find the right wavelength. I got out of bed and followed the sound. It led me downstairs, through corridors I'd walked hundreds of times, but now they felt different. The emergency lighting cast longer shadows, and the familiar layout of the building seemed somehow altered. Doorways appeared where I didn't remember them being. Corridors stretched longer than they should have. The humming grew stronger as I approached the restricted section of the building, the area I'd been told to avoid, where those ongoing projects were supposedly housed. I'd never felt particularly curious about what went on behind those locked doors, but now I was drawn toward them with an almost magnetic pull. I stood in front of the main entrance to the restricted area, my hand on the door handle, when the humming suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it felt oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my eardrums. And in that silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze. My own voice speaking words I'd never said, coming from somewhere inside the restricted area. I ran back to my apartment and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But deep down, I knew it had been real. I'd heard my voice, clear and unmistakable, having a conversation with someone or something I couldn't see. From that night forward, the building felt actively hostile. The motion sensors would trigger randomly, creating cascades of light that followed no logical pattern. The temperature in my apartment would fluctuate wildly, sometimes dropping so low I could see my breath, other times becoming so warm I'd have to strip down to my underwear. The footsteps in the corridor became a nightly occurrence, always the same slow, deliberate pace, always stopping outside my door before moving on. I stopped investigating, stopped trying to catch whoever or whatever was making the sounds. I'd just lie in bed, listening, waiting for them to pass. But the worst part was the mirrors. The building had mirrors in the bathrooms, in some of the offices, in the stairwells. And I began to notice that my reflection wasn't always moving in sync with my actions. Just a fraction of a second delay, as if the person in the mirror was copying me rather than being me. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection making small movements I hadn't made, tiny adjustments of posture or expression that were just different enough to be noticeable. I covered the mirror in my apartment bathroom with a towel, but I couldn't avoid all the others during my daily rounds. Each encounter became a test of nerve, forcing myself to look directly at my reflection to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But each time that slight delay was there, that sense of watching myself from the outside. The breaking point came during what would be my final week at the facility. I was doing my evening rounds when I heard voices coming from the restricted area. Not just my own voice this time, but multiple voices engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost panicked. Against my better judgment, I approached the restricted entrance. The door, which had always been locked, was standing open just wide enough for me to see inside. The corridor beyond was lit with a harsh white light that was nothing like the yellow fluorescence in the rest of the building. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The space beyond was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of offices or laboratories, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor lined with what looked like observation windows. Each window looked into a small room, and in each room was a chair facing away from the window toward a blank wall. But it wasn't the rooms that made me stumble backward in terror. It was the fact that in several of the chairs I could see figures sitting motionless. And even from behind, even in the harsh lighting that distorted everything, I recognized those figures. They were all me. Different versions of me wearing different clothes with slightly different postures, but unmistakably me. Some appeared younger, some older, Some sat rigidly upright, others slouched in their chairs, but all were staring at that blank wall with an intensity that radiated through the glass. I don't remember running. I don't remember packing my belongings or calling my supervisor to quit. My next clear memory is of driving away from the facility in the middle of the night, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I drove for hours, not caring about direction, just putting distance between myself and that place. When I finally stopped, I was in a different state, sitting in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, watching the sun rise over an unfamiliar landscape. I never went back. I never called to explain my sudden departure or to collect my final paycheck. I found this apartment, got a job at a local hardware store, and tried to build a normal life. For a while, I thought I'd succeeded. But the dreams started almost immediately. Dreams where I'm back in that corridor, looking through those windows at versions of myself. In the dreams, one of the figures in the chairs slowly turns around, and I see my own face staring back at me with eyes that hold a knowledge I don't want to possess. And lately the dreams have been changing. The figure that turns around isn't sitting in a chair anymore. It's standing right behind me, whispering things I can't quite understand, but that fill me with a dread so profound I wake up gasping for air. The physical symptoms have returned too. That pressure in my chest whenever I'm near electronic devices, the goosebumps that appear without warning, and now that sweet metallic smell that seems to follow me wherever I go. It's subtle, barely noticeable, but it's always there, lingering just at the edge of perception. I've tried to convince myself that what I saw in that restricted area was some kind of hallucination, a complete psychological break brought on by isolation and stress. But then I remember how real it felt, how clear and detailed every aspect of that corridor was. And I remember that my voice I heard the first night, speaking words I'd never said. What if those weren't different versions of me in those chairs? What if they were all the same person, the same consciousness, experiencing the same moment over and over again? What if I'm not the original, but just another copy, another iteration of an experiment I never agreed to participate in? The key on my mantelpiece moves every day now, not just changing position, but sometimes changing shape entirely. Sometimes it's brass, sometimes silver, sometimes a metal I don't recognize. But it's always there in the morning, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to understand what door it's meant to open. I've been having the urge to drive back to that facility. The urge grows stronger every day, like a voice in my head insisting that I left something important behind, something I need to retrieve. I fight against it, but I can feel my resistance weakening. Because here's what terrifies me most. I'm starting to remember things that happened after I thought I'd escaped. Conversations I had with people in that corridor, instructions I was given, procedures I agreed to undergo. Memories that feel absolutely real, but that couldn't possibly be true because I was never there long enough for any of that to happen. Unless time worked differently in that place. Unless what felt like a few minutes of exploration was actually much longer, unless I never really left at all. I'm recording this because I need someone to know what happened, in case I don't have much more time to tell it. The dreams are becoming more frequent, more vivid. The smell is getting stronger. And yesterday, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror making a gesture I didn't make, pointing toward the door like it was trying to tell me something. I think they're calling me back. I think whatever experiment I stumbled into isn't finished with me yet. And the worst part is, despite everything I've told you, despite the fear that keeps me awake at night, part of me wants to go back. Part of me needs to know what those other versions of myself learned while sitting in those chairs, staring at that blank wall. The key is waiting for me on the mantelpiece right now. I can see it from where I'm sitting, and today it's made of something that looks like bone. It's warm to the touch, and when I hold it, I can hear that low humming sound again, calling me home. I think I'm going to drive back tonight. I think I've always been going to drive back tonight. And I think this recording will be found in an empty apartment, just another mystery for someone else to puzzle over. But if you're listening to this, if you've somehow found this recording, please remember what I've told you. Remember that some places don't let you leave, not really. They just give you the illusion of escape while they prepare the next phase of whatever they're doing to you. And if you ever find yourself working as a caretaker at an old research facility, if you ever hear your own voice speaking words you never said, don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Just run and keep running and pray that you're faster than whatever's chasing you. Because I can hear footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment now. Slow, deliberate steps that are getting closer to my door. And this time I don't think they're going to walk away. Story 9. The clock on the wall ticked against the heartbeat in my ears, out of step and lagging. My hand reached for the familiar doorknob, but it was cooler to the touch, as if anticipating an absence. Shadows in the room shifted in unfamiliar rhythms, overlaying patterns I couldn't predict. I stepped onto the carpet, feeling it give way beneath my feet in a way it never did before, soft yet unyielding. The smell of something indistinct floated past, a scent without a source, lingering too long in the air. As I turned back to leave, the door remained ajar, wider than I had left it. Nothing happened that night. I want to make that clear from the start. People keep asking me about it, but there's really nothing to tell. I was tired, maybe a little stressed from work, and my mind was playing tricks on me. That's all it was, just an overactive imagination combined with exhaustion. Anyone would have experienced the same thing under those circumstances. I didn't see anything unusual when I walked outside. The streetlights were working normally, casting their regular amber glow across the pavement. There wasn't any strange humming sound coming from above. That must have been the power lines, or maybe a neighbor's air conditioning unit running late into the evening. These things have perfectly reasonable explanations when you really think about them logically. The air felt normal too, maybe a little thick, but we'd been having humid weather that week, nothing out of the ordinary. I certainly didn't notice any metallic taste on my tongue, and if I did, it was probably just from the dental work I had done recently. The dentist had warned me about that kind of thing, perfectly normal side effect. I wasn't drawn to look up at the sky. I don't know why people keep suggesting that. I'm not the type of person who stares at the stars or gets lost in thought while standing in my driveway. I'm practical. I went outside to check the mailbox, realized I'd already done that earlier, and came back inside. Simple as that. There's no mystery here. The silence wasn't unusual either. It was late after all. Most people were asleep. Of course it would be quiet. The fact that I couldn't hear any insects or night sounds doesn't mean anything. Sometimes nature just goes quiet. It happens. I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and I know how it sounds at different hours. This was completely normal. I didn't notice the way the shadows seemed to bend in the wrong direction. That's just how shadows work when there are multiple light sources. Basic physics. The street light, the porch light from across the street, maybe a car's headlights in the distance. Light bounces and refracts, creating optical illusions. I learned about this in school. There's nothing supernatural about it. My skin didn't feel different when I was standing there. I wasn't suddenly aware of every nerve ending, like something was scanning me, measuring me. That's ridiculous. I had goosebumps because it was cooler outside than I'd expected. I should have grabbed a jacket before stepping out. That's all it was. a natural physiological response to temperature change. The light above me wasn't there. I keep having to remind myself of this because my memory seems to be playing tricks on me. There was no soft, white glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. No light that cast no shadows but somehow illuminated everything with perfect clarity. I would have noticed something like that immediately. I would have looked up to see where it was coming from, but I didn't look up because there was nothing to see. I certainly didn't feel that strange sensation of weightlessness, like the ground beneath my feet had become uncertain. Like gravity had loosened its grip just slightly. That's not even possible. I was standing firmly on my driveway the entire time. My feet never left the ground. I would remember something as significant as that. The human brain doesn't just forget physical sensations of that magnitude. The warmth that seemed to radiate through my body wasn't real either. It felt like being wrapped in invisible blankets, but that's just my imagination trying to make sense of the cool night air. Sometimes when you're cold, your body plays tricks on you, makes you think you're warm when you're not. It's a well-documented phenomenon. I probably read about it somewhere and my subconscious was just filling in details. I didn't lose any awareness of my surroundings. I was completely conscious the entire time I was outside. I remember walking to the mailbox, standing there for a moment, then walking back to the house. Maybe 30 seconds total. I wasn't gone for longer than that. I definitely wasn't standing motionless in my driveway for an extended period, staring at something that wasn't there. That's not what happened. The voices weren't real. I need to be very clear about this because I think I might have mentioned hearing something to a friend and they misunderstood what I meant. There were no voices, no soft, melodic sounds that seemed to come from inside my own head. No communication without words, no sense of being spoken to in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood perfectly. That's the kind of thing that happens in movies, not in real life. I didn't feel peaceful. I wasn't filled with an overwhelming sense of calm and acceptance. I was just tired and wanted to go back inside. There was no moment where all my worries and anxieties simply melted away, leaving me feeling more centered and complete than I'd ever felt before. That would have been nice, I suppose, but it didn't happen. I was the same stressed, tired person when I came back inside as when I went out. My clothes weren't different when I got back to the house. They fit the same way they always do. They didn't feel looser or tighter, like my body had somehow changed shape. That doesn't even make sense. Bodies don't just change like that. I was wearing the same shirt and pants I'd put on that morning. The fabric felt the same against my skin. Normal cotton and denim, nothing unusual about the texture or temperature. I didn't have any marks on my body. I checked in the bathroom mirror before going to bed, just routine stuff, and everything looked exactly as it should. No small, perfectly circular marks on my arms or legs. No tiny puncture wounds that didn't hurt but seemed too precise to be accidental. No areas of skin that felt different to the touch, slightly numb or overly sensitive. My body was completely unchanged. The dreams I had that night were just dreams. Random neural firing as my brain processed the day's events. There was nothing significant about them. I didn't dream of floating through endless corridors filled with soft blue light. I didn't see rooms with curved walls and surfaces that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. I didn't meet others who seemed familiar even though I'd never seen them before. Dreams don't mean anything. Everyone knows that. I woke up feeling normal the next morning, maybe a little more rested than usual, but I'd probably just gotten better sleep than I thought. I wasn't filled with strange new knowledge or perspectives. I didn't find myself understanding things about the universe that I'd never considered before. I didn't have an inexplicable urge to be kinder to people or to spend more time looking at the sky. I was exactly the same person I'd always been. The small device I found in my pocket must have been there before. Maybe something that fell out of an old jacket when I was doing laundry. It was probably just a piece of jewelry or a broken electronic component. The fact that it was perfectly smooth and seemed to be made of a material I couldn't identify doesn't mean anything. Manufacturing processes are so advanced these days, they can make all kinds of synthetic materials. The way it seemed to generate its own soft warmth was probably just my imagination. Metal doesn't do that on its own. I threw it away, of course. There was no reason to keep some random piece of junk. I certainly didn't spend an hour holding it, feeling strangely reluctant to let it go. I didn't have the irrational sense that it was important, that it was meant for me specifically. That would be crazy. It was just trash, and I disposed of it appropriately. I don't remember which garbage bag I put it in, but that's not important anyway. People at work didn't notice anything different about me. A few colleagues mentioned that I seemed more relaxed, but I'd been making an effort to manage my stress better. That's probably what they were picking up on. It had nothing to do with any supposed experience. I wasn't moving through my day with unusual confidence and clarity. I wasn't finding solutions to problems that had been bothering me for months. I was just having a good day. Everyone has those sometimes. I didn't start paying attention to patterns in the clouds or feeling drawn to certain areas of the sky. That's not something I do. I'm not the type of person who suddenly develops an interest in astronomy or meteorology. If I found myself looking upward more often than usual, it was probably just coincidence. Maybe I was checking for rain clouds or enjoying the nice weather. Perfectly normal behavior. The memory of floating doesn't exist because it never happened. I keep having to remind myself of this because sometimes when I'm not paying attention, I catch myself remembering the sensation of rising gently into the air. The feeling of being supported by something invisible and infinitely careful. The view of my neighborhood from above, seeing the familiar streets and houses from a perspective I'd never had before. But memories can be false. The brain is constantly creating and revising our recollections. This is well-established science. I didn't see the inside of anything. There was no smooth, curved chamber with walls that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. No surfaces that felt warm and alive to the touch. No sense of being in a space that was somehow larger inside than it appeared from outside. No comfortable chair that seemed to mold itself to my body. No gentle restraints that held me without causing any discomfort. None of that happened because I was never anywhere except my own driveway. The beings I didn't meet were not tall and slender with large, dark eyes that seemed to hold infinite compassion. They didn't communicate with me through direct thought transmission. They didn't explain that they'd been watching humanity's progress with great interest. They didn't tell me that I had been selected for a specific reason, though they were vague about what that reason might be. None of this occurred because there were no beings. I was alone the entire time. I didn't undergo any kind of examination. No one scanned my body with devices that looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. No one took samples of my hair or skin with instruments that caused no pain. No one asked me questions about my life, my relationships, my hopes and fears. No one seemed particularly interested in my memories of childhood or my thoughts about the future. There was no gentle probing of my mind, no sense of my thoughts being read and catalogued. The information they didn't share with me wasn't about humanity's place in a larger cosmic community. They didn't explain that Earth was part of an ongoing experiment in consciousness development. They didn't tell me that human emotions were particularly valuable and rare in the universe. They didn't suggest that our capacity for both creativity and destruction made us fascinating subjects for study. They didn't imply that contact would become more common in the coming years. None of this was discussed because there was no conversation. I wasn't shown images of other worlds, other species, other ways of existing. I didn't see vast cities floating in space, connected by streams of light. I didn't witness beings of pure energy dancing between stars. I didn't observe civilizations that had transcended physical form entirely. I didn't learn about the delicate balance required to maintain life across the galaxy. My understanding of reality wasn't expanded in ways that left me feeling both humbled and exhilarated. When it ended, which it didn't because it never began, I wasn't filled with a profound sense of gratitude. I didn't feel like I'd been given a gift beyond measure. I didn't experience the strange sadness of being returned to ordinary consciousness after touching something infinite. I simply walked back into my house, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Nothing more complicated than that. The mark on my calendar doesn't mean anything. I must have made it myself and forgotten about it. Just a small circle around today's date, drawn in a blue ink that I don't remember owning. Probably just absent-minded doodling while I was on a phone call. The fact that it's the exact same shade of blue as the light I didn't see is pure coincidence. Colors repeat themselves all the time in daily life. There's nothing significant about it. I don't feel different now. I'm not walking through my days with a secret knowledge that changes everything. I'm not seeing connections and patterns that were invisible to me before. I'm not filled with a quiet confidence that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. I'm not less worried about the small stuff that used to consume my thoughts. I'm exactly the same person I was before nothing happened to me. The dreams haven't continued. I'm not visited nightly by the same peaceful presence. I don't find myself in that blue-lit space, learning things I can never quite remember upon waking. I don't have conversations with the beings who aren't real about topics that seem vitally important until consciousness returns. I sleep normally now, just like I always have. Sometimes I wake up feeling refreshed and oddly hopeful, but that's probably just better sleep hygiene. I haven't been marked or chosen or selected for anything. The idea is ridiculous. I'm completely ordinary. There's nothing special about me that would attract attention from anyone or anything. I live a quiet life, pay my taxes, follow the rules. I'm not the type of person who has extraordinary experiences. I'm boring, predictable, safe. That's exactly how I like it, and that's exactly how it's going to stay. The light in my bedroom window tonight is just the moon. It's bright and white and perfectly normal. The fact that it seems to be pulsing slightly is probably just atmospheric distortion. Maybe some clouds passing in front of it. The way it appears to be growing brighter as I watch doesn't mean anything special. Moonlight changes intensity all the time depending on weather conditions and atmospheric pressure. I'm not feeling that familiar sense of anticipation. My heart isn't beating faster with excitement rather than fear. I'm not being drawn to the window, compelled to look up at the source of that beautiful, welcoming light. I'm just going about my normal evening routine, getting ready for bed like I do every night. There's nothing different about tonight, nothing at all. The humming sound is probably just the refrigerator. Story 10. I had been standing by the old oak dresser, hearing the muffled taps that came and went in irregular echoes. The room was still, caught in the kind of quiet that suggested its own vigilance, every object seemingly poised. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor as if reaching for something that wasn't there. Each quiet tick from the aged clock seemed slower than the last, hinting at a rhythm I couldn't predict. Time was a breath held, waiting. Then as I strained to feel the pattern break, the air shifted a draft, almost imperceptible, snuck through the closed window. That memory feels like the last clear thing I can hold on to. Everything after that moment dissolves into fragments, pieces of something that happened but refuses to stay whole in my mind. I know something occurred. I can feel it in the way my body responds to certain sounds, the way my pulse quickens when I catch movement in my peripheral vision. But the details slip away like water through cupped hands. I've been different since then. Friends notice it, though they can't put their finger on what's changed. I catch myself listening to conversations that aren't happening, turning toward doorways where no one stands. Sleep comes in shallow waves, interrupted by the sensation that I'm forgetting something crucial, something that needs to be remembered. The investigation began when I found the recording device in my jacket pocket. A small digital recorder I didn't remember owning, its surface smooth and unfamiliar in my palm. The weight felt wrong, too light for something solid, yet it vibrated faintly when I held it, like a phone receiving a call that never quite connects. When I pressed play, static filled the air. Not the comfortable white noise of an empty recording, but something more deliberate, patterns within the hiss that suggested meaning just beyond comprehension. Then, buried beneath the electronic wash, I heard my own voice speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The cadence was mine, but the tone carried a quality I didn't recognize, cautious, almost whispering, as if afraid of being overheard. The first clear fragment came while I was listening to that recording for the third time. Suddenly I was back in that room by the dresser, but the perspective had shifted. I wasn't standing anymore. I was sitting in a chair I couldn't see, looking up at something that cast no shadow despite the brightness it emanated. The light pulsed irregularly, white flashes that seemed to bypass my eyes entirely and imprint themselves directly onto my thoughts. Voices surrounded me, but not human voices. They carried the rhythm of conversation without the warmth of breath behind them. Electronic undertones shifted frequency as they spoke, creating harmonics that made my teeth ache in the memory. I tried to focus on what they were saying, but the words existed in a space between languages, familiar in structure yet completely alien in meaning. In that fragment, I remember trying to move my hands and finding them unresponsive, not restrained, but disconnected, as if the signals from my brain were traveling through thick liquid before reaching my limbs. The sensation was more disturbing than pain would have been, a complete separation between intention and action that left me floating in my own body. The second fragment arrived while I was examining the recorder more closely. Its surface bore no manufacturer marks, no serial numbers, nothing to indicate its origin. As I turned it over in my hands, the vibration intensified, and suddenly I was experiencing another piece of that lost time. This memory began with darkness, complete, enveloping darkness that felt alive somehow, pressing against my skin with the weight of attention. Then, without warning, every light in the space flickered on simultaneously. Not the warm glow of incandescent bulbs, but harsh fluorescent brightness that revealed a room I didn't recognize. The walls were too smooth, almost organic in their seamless construction. No corners where surfaces met, just gentle curves that suggested the entire space had been molded rather than built. The floor beneath my feet felt solid but yielded slightly with each step, like walking on a surface that was learning to support weight. Behind me something moved, not footsteps, but a sound like fabric being drawn across metal, rhythmic and purposeful. I tried to turn, but my neck wouldn't respond to the command. Instead, I could only listen as whatever was there circled slowly, always staying just outside my field of vision. The sound it made shifted pitch as it moved, creating a Doppler effect that suggested impossible speed combined with perfect control. The air in that space carried a scent I've never encountered before or since. New plastic and cold blood, but somehow clean, sterile. It filled my lungs with each breath, coating the inside of my mouth with a taste that lingered for what felt like hours. Even now, certain synthetic odors trigger a phantom echo of that smell, making my stomach turn with recognition I can't explain. As I continued my investigation, strange things began happening in my current reality. Mirrors started showing reflections that lagged behind my movements by fractions of a second. I would raise my hand, and my reflection would follow a heartbeat later, as if the image had to travel a great distance before reaching the glass. Sounds became unreliable. I would hear my phone ringing in another room, only to find it powered off and silent. Conversations drifted through walls from apartments I knew were empty. Electronic interference crept into every device around me, televisions displaying brief flashes of static, radios picking up frequencies that broadcast only rhythmic pulses. The most disturbing development was the way familiar objects began feeling foreign in my hands. My coffee cup would seem heavier some mornings, its handle positioned slightly wrong for my grip. Books I'd owned for years felt thicker, their pages rustling with a different texture when turned. Even my own reflection started looking subtly incorrect, as if I was seeing myself through a lens that distorted proportions in ways too small to identify but too consistent to ignore. The third fragment emerged during one of these episodes of reality distortion. I was washing dishes when the water suddenly felt wrong against my skin, too thick, too warm, carrying an electric tingle that made my fingers numb. As I stared at my hands beneath the stream, the memory crashed over me with perfect clarity. I was in that curved room again, but now I could see more details. Panels in the walls pulsed with soft bioluminescent light, creating patterns that seemed to respond to my presence. When I focused on one area, the lights would intensify, as if acknowledging my attention. The effect was beautiful and deeply unsettling, like being inside something that was aware of being observed. The voices returned, clearer now but no more comprehensible. They seemed to be discussing me, their electronic tones rising and falling in what felt like evaluation or assessment. Occasionally, one voice would isolate itself from the others, directing what sounded like questions in my direction. I found myself trying to respond, though I had no idea what was being asked. During these exchanges, I became aware of a presence directly in front of me. Not visible, but undeniably there a concentration of attention so intense it felt physical. It studied me with the thoroughness of a scientist examining a specimen, and I had the uncomfortable sensation that it was finding exactly what it expected to find. My hands, when I could finally see them in this memory, appeared different. The skin looked paler, almost translucent, with veins showing more prominently than they should. When I tried to make a fist, my fingers moved with mechanical precision, as if they were being operated rather than controlled. The disconnect between my intentions and my actions had become complete. The fourth fragment was the most disturbing because it felt too clear, too detailed for a recovered memory. It came to me while I was lying in bed, neither fully asleep nor completely awake, in that liminal space where thoughts take on lives of their own. I was back in the chair, but this time I could see my surroundings with perfect clarity. The room extended much further than I had initially realized, its curved walls disappearing into shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. Structures that might have been equipment or furniture dotted the space, their purposes unclear but their presence somehow menacing. The beings around me, and I knew they were beings, though I never saw them directly, worked with efficient purpose. I could hear them manipulating objects, operating devices that hummed and clicked with complex rhythms. Occasionally, something would be brought close to me, held just outside my field of vision, while electronic voices discussed its significance. The most vivid part of this memory involved a sensation of something being inserted into my thoughts, not physically, but as if my consciousness was being accessed like a file on a computer. I could feel foreign attention moving through my memories, examining experiences and relationships with clinical detachment. Some memories were lingered over, others dismissed quickly, and a few seemed to be carefully extracted and stored elsewhere. During this process, I became aware that parts of my mind were being edited, not erased completely, but rearranged, connections severed, and new pathways created. The sensation was like feeling someone rearrange furniture in a dark room. I knew things were being moved, but I couldn't see what or where. The final fragment I recovered was the most unsettling because it suggested the encounter wasn't a single event, but part of an ongoing process. This memory came to me while I was reviewing the audio recording again, listening to my own voice speaking those indecipherable words. Suddenly I understood what I was saying in the recording. I was describing the room, the beings, the procedures, speaking in calm, measured tones as if providing a report. But the disturbing part wasn't the content, it was the realization that I was speaking willingly, even eagerly, as if I wanted to document everything I was experiencing. In this final memory, I could see myself from an external perspective, sitting in that chair with perfect posture, my face wearing an expression of serene cooperation. I watched myself answer questions, submit to examinations, even offer suggestions about how the procedures might be improved. The person in the chair looked like me, but acted with a compliance that felt completely foreign to my nature. As this memory played out, I became aware that this wasn't the first time I had been in that room. There were other sessions, other recordings, a long history of interactions that stretched back further than I could trace. Each visit involved the same careful editing of my memories, the same selective removal of details, the same installation of gaps that would prevent me from seeing the full picture. The most disturbing realization was that I was scheduled to return, not forced, but programmed with a compulsion that would bring me back to that place when the time was right. I could feel that compulsion even now, a gentle but persistent urge to go somewhere I couldn't quite identify, to keep an appointment I didn't remember making. As I write this, the recording device continues to vibrate in my pocket, its frequency gradually increasing. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for it, ready to press play again, though I know there's nothing more to hear, or perhaps there is, and I'm simply not ready to remember it yet. The investigation feels incomplete, but I'm beginning to suspect that incompleteness is intentional. The fragments I've recovered may be all I'm allowed to remember, carefully measured doses of truth designed to maintain some necessary balance between knowledge and ignorance. Strange things continue to happen around me. My reflection still lags behind my movements. Electronic devices still malfunction in my presence. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, I hear those electronic voices discussing plans I'm not supposed to understand. The most unsettling development is that I've started to find the experiences comforting rather than frightening. The gaps in my memory feel less like losses and more like merciful omissions. The ongoing strangeness in my daily life has begun to feel normal, even preferable to the sharp clarity of ordinary existence. I think I'm beginning to understand why my memories were edited. Some knowledge is too heavy for an unmodified mind to carry. Some experiences require preparation, gradual acclimation, careful management of awareness. What I experienced in that curved room wasn't an ending but a beginning, the first phase of something much larger. The recording device has stopped vibrating, but I can feel it waiting in my pocket like a patient animal. Soon, I think, it will be time to listen again. Soon, I'll be ready for the next fragment, the next carefully measured dose of truth. But for now, I sit by my window and watch the shadows move in patterns that seem almost familiar, listening to sounds that might be static or might be voices, feeling the gentle pull of an appointment I'm not supposed to remember making. The question that haunts me isn't what happened in that room, but what's supposed to happen next, and why, despite everything, I find myself looking forward to finding out.